The crystal spires of the imperial palace stretched toward the purple skies of Astoria, their surfaces gleaming with the light of 3 setting suns. Inside one of the lesser towers, Princess Lyra stood before the giant window, her reflection a stark reminder of why she was confined to this section of the palace. At barely 6 feet tall, she was considered a runt by her species standards. Her silvery skin lacked the metallic sheen that her people prized, and her frame was too delicate compared to her warrior siblings. The sound of heavy footsteps echoing through the corridor made her shoulders tense. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and her older brother Mars entered the room. He towered over her at 9 feet tall, his skin gleaming like polished platinum. "Father requests your presence in the Great Hall," Mars announced, his tone carrying the usual mix of pity and embarrassment he reserved for her. "Try not to embarrass us further." Lyra straightened her diplomatic robes and followed him through the winding corridors. Her steps were quiet compared to his thunderous stride, another trait that marked her as different. The nobles they passed bowed deeply to Mars while barely acknowledging her presence. The Great Hall was packed with the Empire's elite. Warriors stood in their ceremonial armor, their achievements carved into their metallic skin in glowing runes. Scholars wore their traditional floating robes, data streams scrolling across the fabric in complex patterns. At the far end, Emperor Atlas sat upon the stellar throne, his massive frame making the ancient seat of power look almost small. As Lyra approached the throne, she noticed the disappointment in her father's eyes, the same look she had seen every day since her first evaluation at age 5. She had failed to develop the dense metallic bone structure typical of their species, and her strength levels remained far below acceptable royal standards. "Daughter," Emperor Atlas's voice boomed across the hall, making several crystals in the ceiling vibrate. "Your siblings have brought glory to our lineage. Mars leads our finest battle fleet. Terra commands our planetary defense forces. And yet you—" He paused, letting the silence emphasize his words. "You spend your time studying ancient texts and foreign cultures." Lyra kept her head high, though her heart raced. "Knowledge can be as powerful as any weapon, father." A ripple of disparaging laughter spread through the court. Even the scholars looked away, embarrassed by her statement. In their society, physical might and martial prowess were the only truly respected attributes. "Since you find alien cultures so fascinating," the Emperor continued, "you shall have the opportunity to study them firsthand. The Empire has acquired new frontier territories. You will serve as diplomatic envoy to these primitive worlds." The court's reaction made the true nature of this assignment clear. It was exile wrapped in a diplomatic title. Her father was sending her to the farthest reaches of the Empire, where her weakness would not shame the royal family. But as the courtiers smirked and whispered, Lyra felt something unexpected. Hope. Away from the suffocating traditions of the imperial court, she might finally find a place where her differences were not seen as flaws. "I accept this honor with gratitude," she replied, her quiet voice carrying clearly through the hall. The lack of shame or defeat in her tone caused several nobles to frown in confusion. That evening, as she packed her belongings, Lyra looked at the star charts of her assigned territory. The frontier systems were unexplored, dangerous, and far from the Empire's center of power. To her family, this assignment was a punishment, a way to hide their embarrassment of a princess. They didn't understand that she had spent years studying these frontier regions. While her siblings trained in combat, she had learned about emerging civilizations, cosmic phenomena, and the delicate art of diplomacy. Where they saw exile, she saw opportunity. As the 3 suns finally set, casting the crystal spires in darkness, Lyra smiled. Tomorrow she would leave for the frontier, carrying the shame of her family name. But something deep inside told her that out there, among the stars, she would find more than exile. She would find her destiny. 3 months into her diplomatic mission, Lyra sat in the command chair of her ship, the Stellar Envoy. The vessel was small by imperial standards, another slight from her father, but she had grown to appreciate its agility. The bridge crew, initially disappointed to serve under the defective princess, had slowly warmed to her methodical approach to exploration. "Unknown vessel detected, Your Highness," reported Nav Officer Rigel, his metallic fingers dancing across the control panel. It's different from anything in our database. Lyra leaned forward, studying the holographic display. The ship was indeed unusual, smaller than Imperial vessels, with a practical design that favored function over the ceremonial aesthetics her people preferred. "Open a channel," she ordered, her quiet voice steady with carefully contained excitement. The response came not in the expected form of towering metallic beings, but as an image of a small, soft-skinned creature. "This is Commander James Reed of the Earth ship Pioneer. We come in peace and friendship." The bridge crew stiffened, some letting out sounds of disgust at the human's appearance. But Lyra found herself fascinated. The commander's eyes held intelligence and determination that reminded her of her own reflection. "I am Princess Lyra of the Stellar Empire. Welcome to this sector of space." She ignored the disapproving murmurs from her crew at her friendly tone. Before either could say more, proximity alarms blared across both ships. A rogue asteroid field, hidden by a nearby gas giant's magnetic interference, was hurtling toward them. Evasive maneuvers. James's voice came through clear, his crew already responding with impressive speed. Lyra's crew hesitated, looking to her in confusion. Imperial protocol dictated they should simply power up their shields and let the asteroids break against them, a show of strength typical of her people. But Lyra saw what they didn't. "The human ship's shields aren't as strong as ours," she announced. "If we follow protocol, they'll be destroyed." She turned to her navigation officer. "Match their evasive pattern. We'll guide them through." Working together, the two ships wove through the asteroid field. The humans' maneuvering skills were remarkable, making up for their weaker technology with innovation and skill. When a particularly large asteroid threatened to crush the Pioneer, Lyra ordered her ship to extend its shields around the Earth vessel, a decision that made her crew gasp in shock. Imperial ships never protected lesser vessels. Once clear of danger, Commander Reed's face reappeared on the screen. His smile was strange to Imperial eyes, but Lyra found it oddly warming. "Thank you, Princess. That was some impressive flying and quick thinking." "Your ship's agility is remarkable," Lyra replied, ignoring her crew's disapproving looks. "Perhaps we could exchange information about our respective technologies and cultures." What followed was 3 days of joint operations between the ships. While most of her crew maintained a cold distance from the humans, Lyra spent hours in discussion with Commander Reed. She learned about Earth, its history, and its rapid advancement into space. James, in turn, showed genuine interest in her insights about the frontier worlds, something her own people had always dismissed. On the 4th day, as the ships prepared to part ways, Lyra received an urgent message from the Empire. Reports of rising tensions along the frontier required her immediate attention. As she prepared to bid farewell to the Pioneer, she caught herself looking at Commander Reed with an unfamiliar feeling in her chest. "Until we meet again, Commander," she said softly. James nodded, his expression suggesting he felt the same unexpected connection. "The galaxy's a big place, Princess, but something tells me our paths will cross again." As the Pioneer disappeared into warp, Lyra touched the screen where James's image had been. For the first time in her life, she had met someone who saw her mind before her physical form, and she knew, with absolute certainty, that this wouldn't be their last encounter. 2 weeks after her encounter with the Pioneer, Lyra stood before the Imperial Council, her heart pounding but her voice steady. The massive council chamber, with its floating platforms and crystalline displays, showed live feeds from both Earth space and Imperial territories. The images weren't encouraging. 3 border skirmishes in the past week, growled General Steele, his metallic skin reflecting the red warning lights. These humans refuse to acknowledge Imperial supremacy in the frontier sectors. "They're defending their colonies," Lyra countered, knowing she was breaking protocol by speaking without permission. "Colonies that existed before we claimed those sectors." The council members towered over her in their elevated seats, their disapproving glares making her feel even smaller than usual. But she stood her ground. The humans weren't backing down, and a war would devastate both sides. "Perhaps," she continued, her quiet voice somehow filling the chamber, "what we need isn't a show of force, but a show of unity." High Counselor Dawn leaned forward, her crystalline crown catching the light. "Explain yourself," Princess, though I doubt your scholarly approach will solve this crisis. Lyra activated her personal holoprojector, displaying images from her encounter with the pioneer. I propose a marriage alliance. She paused as shocked murmurs filled the chamber. Between myself and Commander James Reed of Earth. The chamber erupted in laughter. Even her own brother Mars, watching from his battle fleet, couldn't contain his amusement. Sister, he chuckled, you've finally lost your mind. But Lyra had anticipated this reaction. Earth's military is small but innovative. Their ships are weak but incredibly agile. They lack our technology, but their adaptation rate is remarkable. She looked each council member in the eye. A marriage between a human commander and an imperial princess would give both sides a reason to cooperate rather than fight. And you volunteer yourself. High Counselor Dawn's voice dripped with sarcasm. How? Convenient. I'm considered defective by our standards, Lyra said bluntly, causing several counselors to shift uncomfortably. My marriage prospects within the Empire are non-existent. But to humans, my size and interests wouldn't be disadvantages. The council chambers fell silent as the implications sank in. They could rid themselves of their embarrassing princess, while gaining a diplomatic solution to the human problem. It was almost too perfect. While the council deliberated, Lyra's thoughts drifted to James. She had already sent him a private message explaining her plan. His response had surprised her. Political marriages are part of Earth's history too. But I accept not just for peace, but because I saw something special in you, Princess. Finally, High Counselor Dawn spoke. The Council accepts your proposal, Princess Lyra. We will present this offer to Earth's government immediately. Within hours, Earth's response arrived. They accepted with one condition. The ceremony would follow human traditions alongside imperial ones. The Council agreed, seeing it as a minor concession. As Lyra prepared to leave the chamber, her brother Mars approached her. You're really going through with this? Binding yourself to a weak human? Lyra looked up at her giant brother and smiled. You still don't understand, do you? Their different way of thinking, their adaptability. These aren't weaknesses. They're strengths we've been too proud to recognize. That evening, as she packed for her journey to Earth, Lyra received another message from James. I know this started as politics, but I meant what I said about seeing something special in you. Together, we might just change both our worlds. Lyra touched the screen, her silver fingers tracing the words. For the first time in her life, someone was choosing her not despite her differences, but because of them. Perhaps this political arrangement would become something neither the Empire nor Earth expected. A true partnership of equals. The first month of their marriage brought more challenges than either Lyra or James had expected. Their new home, a specially designed diplomatic residence on Earth's lunar colony, became a daily experiment in cultural adaptation. Lyra stood in their kitchen one morning, staring at the coffee maker with confusion. In the Imperial Palace, food and drinks were prepared by automated systems, not these manual devices James seemed to love. She pressed a button, and hot coffee sprayed across the counter. Need help? James asked, entering the kitchen with a smile. He was dressed in his commander's uniform, ready for another day at the Joint Fleet Command. I don't understand why you prefer these primitive methods, Lyra said, trying to clean up the mess. The Imperial way is more efficient. James stepped beside her, his shoulder barely reaching her chest. Sometimes the journey is as important as the destination. Here, let me show you. He guided her through the coffee-making process, his hands gentle as they demonstrated each step. The smell of fresh coffee filled the kitchen, and Lyra had to admit it was more satisfying than the instant beverages she was used to. Perhaps some older methods have merit, she conceded. Later that day, during a diplomatic meeting, Lyra watched James struggle with Imperial protocol. The holographic representatives from her homeworld towered over him, their voices booming with barely concealed disdain. Commander Reed, sneered Council Member Granite, your proposals for joint fleet exercises lack the proper force deployment. Typical human weakness. James started to argue, but Lyra touched his arm. Allow me, she whispered, then addressed the Council. The human approach emphasizes mobility and surprise. Their smaller ships can execute maneuvers our larger vessels cannot. Perhaps we should listen before dismissing their tactics." The council members exchanged looks of surprise. It was the first time Lyra had openly defended human military doctrine. James squeezed her hand under the table, a gesture of appreciation she had grown to cherish. That evening, as Earth's sun set behind the lunar mountains, they sat in their observation dome. The sight of both Earth and the distant imperial homeworld in the same sky never failed to move them. "They mock everything we do," James said quietly. "Your people think we're primitive because we're smaller, because we do things differently." Lyra turned to him, her silver skin catching the starlight. "And my people are so trapped in tradition, they can't see the value of change." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "But you've never once mocked my differences from imperial standards." James reached up to touch her face, a human gesture of affection she had come to treasure. "Your differences are what make you extraordinary. You see possibilities where others see only weakness." Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent message. A trade dispute between human and imperial merchants had turned violent. The council demanded their immediate attention. As they hurried to the command center, Lyra realized something. Every crisis, every challenge they faced was teaching them to blend their strengths. James's quick thinking complemented her deep knowledge of imperial politics. Her understanding of both cultures helped bridge gaps his human diplomats couldn't cross. "You know," James said as they worked late into the night resolving the dispute, "they thought this marriage would be a joke. A failed princess and a primitive human." Lyra looked at the successful resolution displayed on their screens, a solution that combined human flexibility with imperial protocol. "Perhaps that's why it works," she replied. "We've both spent our lives proving others wrong about our worth." As they headed home, walking hand in hand despite the stares from both humans and imperial visitors, Lyra felt stronger than ever. In finding each other, they hadn't just created a political alliance. They had found someone who saw strength in their differences, and together they were becoming something entirely new, a bridge between two worlds. The attack came without warning. Lyra and James were reviewing fleet reports in their lunar office when every emergency screen flashed red. A massive alien fleet had appeared at the edges of both Earth and Imperial space. "The Shadow Federation," Lyra whispered, recognizing the black crystalline ships. "They've been quiet for centuries. Why now?" Before James could respond, multiple distress calls flooded their communications system. The enemy ships were using some kind of advanced phase technology, passing right through standard shields like they didn't exist. "Imperial Fleet Command reports heavy losses," their AI assistant announced. 3 border stations destroyed. Earth's outer colonies are also under attack." James jumped into action, pulling up tactical displays. "Their ships are appearing inside our defense perimeters. How is that possible?" Lyra studied the attack pattern, her mind racing. "They're using quantum tunneling technology. My people dismissed it as theoretically impossible, but..." She pointed to the energy signatures. "Look at these readings." The next few hours were chaos. The Imperial fleet, proud and mighty, discovered their powerful shields were useless against the phase-shifted weapons. Earth's more numerous but lighter ships were being picked off one by one. "The Council is demanding we fall back to core worlds," Lyra reported, her silver skin pale with worry. "They're willing to sacrifice the frontier colonies." James slammed his fist on the desk. "Unacceptable. Those colonies have millions of civilians, both human and imperial." Lyra stared at the tactical display, watching another imperial dreadnought explode. Then something caught her eye. "James, look at this recording from the Pioneer Aya, when they tried to escape through that asteroid field." James leaned in. The shadow ships couldn't phase through the natural gravity distortions. They had to go around. "And remember that training exercise last month." Lyra's voice grew excited. "When your ships used the lunar gravity wells to perform those primitive slingshot maneuvers." James's eyes lit up as he understood. "If we combine Earth's gravity assist techniques with imperial power." They worked through the night, developing a desperate plan. Earth's smaller ships would use complex gravity assist maneuvers to create a web of gravitational distortion, while Imperial ships would use their powerful engines to amplify these natural forces. "The Council will never agree," Lyra said as they finished. "They'll say it's beneath their dignity to copy human tactics. And Earth's admirals will say we can't risk our remaining ships on an untested theory," James added. Just then, another emergency signal came through. The Shadow Federation had launched a direct assault on Earth's Mars colony and the imperial frontier world of New Astoria. Millions of lives hung in the balance. Lyra straightened to her full height, her voice carrying the authority she'd spent a lifetime earning. "Then we don't ask permission. The Pioneer Fleet is under your command, and I still control the Stellar Envoy Task Force." James nodded, understanding. They were about to commit treason against both their worlds in an attempt to save them. "If we fail," he said quietly, "we'll be branded traitors by both sides." Lyra took his hand, the size difference no longer feeling strange but natural. "And if we succeed, then maybe both our peoples will finally see what we've known all along, that true strength comes from combining our differences, not rejecting them." They sent out the call to their loyal crews, human and imperial both. As their small combined fleet prepared for what could be a suicide mission, Lyra looked at her human husband and felt not the shame her family had always heaped upon her, but fierce pride. The Shadow Federation had made a crucial mistake. They had attacked two worlds separately, never imagining that a defective imperial princess and a primitive human commander would find a way to turn their differences into a weapon. Now they would learn just how wrong they were. The combined fleet of 20 ships, 12 human vessels, and 8 imperial cruisers looked tiny against the massive Shadow Federation armada. Lyra stood aboard the Stellar Envoy, while James commanded the Pioneer Fleet from his flagship. Their crews, once skeptical of working together, now moved with unified purpose. "All ships report ready," James's voice came through their private channel. "Though I still think you should have evacuated to a safer position. We rise or fall together," Lyra replied firmly. "Begin Phase 1. The human ships moved first, performing what Imperial tactical officers had once mocked as primitive dance moves. They used planets, moons, and asteroids as gravity slingshots, building up tremendous speed while consuming minimal fuel. The shadow ships, confident in their phase technology, moved to intercept. "They're taking the bait," Lyra announced. Imperial ships power up gravity generators to maximum. The Imperial cruisers, including the Stellar Envoy, activated their massive engines, but instead of moving, they channeled all that power into specialized gravity beam projectors, a modification Lyra and James had worked through the night to create. As the human ships wove their complex patterns, the Imperial vessels amplified the natural gravity wells they passed through. Suddenly, space itself became a weapon. Shadow ships trying to phase through the gravity web found themselves trapped, their quantum tunneling technology disrupted by the overlapping fields. "It's working," James shouted. "Their phase shields are failing." The Shadow Federation commanders, realizing their vulnerability, tried to retreat. But they had never faced this combination of human ingenuity and Imperial power. Ships that had seemed invincible were now being crushed by artificially enhanced gravity wells or torn apart by the stress of rapid gravitational changes. News of the battle spread quickly. The Imperial Council and Earth's military command, who had been preparing to punish Lyra and James for their unauthorized action, watched in stunned silence as the supposedly invincible enemy fell into chaos. "All ships, execute final maneuver," Lyra ordered. The human vessels pulled off their most daring move yet, using the amplified gravity fields to perform an impossible-seeming spiral that caught the remaining shadow ships in a gravitational vice. When the last enemy vessel surrendered, shears erupted across both human and Imperial frequencies. The combined fleet had achieved what neither civilization could do alone. But the real surprise came during the victory ceremony 3 days later. The Imperial Council, led by High Counselor Dawn, arrived on Earth's lunar base, the first time they had ever deigned to leave their home territory. "Princess Lyra," Dawn's voice boomed through the assembly hall. "We once considered your differences a weakness. Today, those same differences have saved our empire." She turned to James. "And Commander Reed, your human tactics, which we dismissed as primitive, have proven to be the key to victory." James stood proudly beside his wife. Neither of us could have succeeded alone. It was our partnership that made the difference. Earth's military command agreed. Within days, both governments had approved the creation of a new joint defense force, with Lyra and James as its leaders. The same qualities that had made Lyra an outcast, her ability to think differently, to embrace change, to see value in other approaches, were now being hailed as visionary. As they walked through their new headquarters, watching human and Imperial crews working side by side, Lyra felt James squeeze her hand. "Not bad for an unworthy princess and a primitive human," he said with a smile. Lyra looked down at her husband, seeing not a small, soft-skinned creature, but the partner who had helped her turn her greatest perceived weaknesses into their greatest shared strength. "They thought our differences would make us weak," she replied. "Instead, they made us unstoppable." 5 years after the Shadow Federation's defeat, the Joint Military Academy stood as a gleaming testament to change. Built on Earth's moon, its architecture blended Imperial crystal spires with human practical design. Inside one of its main lecture halls, Lyra watched as her husband addressed the first graduating class. "Look around you," James said to the mixed audience of humans and Imperials. "When my wife and I first proposed this academy, people said it was impossible, that our species were too different to train together." The graduating class, humans and Imperials sitting side by side, laughed. Over the past 3 years, they had proven those doubts wrong. Human cadets had learned to handle Imperial technology, while Imperial students had mastered human tactical thinking. Lyra stepped forward, her silver skin gleaming under the lights. She no longer tried to stand as tall as a typical Imperial, having learned that true strength had nothing to do with size. "Each of you represents what we can achieve together," she said, her quiet voice carrying the authority of experience. "You've learned to see differences not as weaknesses, but as opportunities." After the ceremony, they walked through the Academy's halls. Training rooms showed human agility instructors teaching Imperial cadets about mobility and flexibility. In technology labs, Imperial engineers helped human students understand advanced quantum mechanics. "Remember when your brother Mars said this place would never work?" James asked, watching a mixed group of cadets practice combat maneuvers. Lyra smiled. "The same brother who now sends his own children here to train. Mars had been one of their biggest critics, but after seeing the Academy's success, he had become one of its strongest supporters." They reached their favorite spot, an observation deck overlooking both Earth and the Imperial homeworld. The view never failed to remind them of how far they'd come. "The Emperor has requested our presence next month," Lyra said, touching a message on her data screen. "It seems he wants to discuss expanding the program." James raised an eyebrow. "The same Emperor who once called me a primitive barbarian, and you a defective disappointment." "People change," Lyra replied. "We help them change by showing them a better way." Their conversation was interrupted by a group of cadets asking for advice on a joint project. As they helped the students, a mix of humans and Imperials working together without a second thought, Lyra felt a deep sense of satisfaction. That evening, they hosted a dinner in their lunar home. The guests included Imperial nobles, human diplomats, and their Academy staff. No one seemed to notice or care about the size differences between species anymore. Conversations flowed freely about everything from tactical theory to cultural exchange. "We've created something permanent," James said quietly as they watched their guests interact. "Something that will outlast us." Lyra nodded. The Academy was more than just a school. It was living proof that their marriage wasn't just a political alliance, but a model for the future. Later, as their guests departed, they received news that the first joint fleet, graduated Academy students serving together on ships with mixed crews, had successfully prevented a pirate attack on the frontier. They had used a perfect blend of Imperial power and human ingenuity, just as Lyra and James had once done. "You know what makes me proudest?" Lyra said, watching the report. "They don't even think it's unusual anymore. Working together has become natural." James took her hand, still amazed at how perfectly they fit together despite their physical differences. "We didn't just change military doctrine or politics," he said. "We changed hearts and minds." Lyra looked at their reflection in the window. the small human commander and the unworthy imperial princess who had proven everyone wrong. Their love story had become legend in both cultures, studied by Academy students as the beginning of a new era. "We showed them that being different isn't a weakness," she said softly. "It's the foundation of true strength."